digital democracy. We're here with the Digital Democracy Group, and we're letting people in right now. So we're going to tread water for a couple minutes while everyone gets added to the Zoom presentation. We're really looking forward to having our presentation today. We'll have two speakers that will be tag teaming at times, and looks like we're getting a nice showing for this particular seminar, and we'll get going here. And as soon as I see my screen quit jumping around, so I know most of you are in, then I will start our intro and give a little bio on our speaker, and then we'll get going with her presentation. She has some slides, but also just conversation for us. So it looks like it's pretty good now. So I would like to formally welcome you to the Defending Democracy in the Digital Age. We're so happy to see all of you join us today. I'm Sherry George with the League of Women Voters of Alaska. And joining with the League of Women Voters of Maine, the Leagues of Alaska and Colorado have collaborated to offer 20 seminars over the last 2 years, spanning such topics as facing the challenges of artificial intelligence, if it trends, it's true, or how lies get turned into reality, elections interference and protecting election workers and volunteers, pre-banking strategies designed to head off online manipulations, and most recently, Maricha Shock on the Silicon Valley tech coup, as she calls it, and potential solutions. But today, we are so honored to have Professor Latanya Sweeney join us. She's professor of the practice of government and technology at the Harvard Kennedy School and in the Harvard Faculty of Arts and Sciences. She's also editor-in-chief of Technology Science, founder and director of both the Public Interest Tech Lab and of the Data Privacy Lab. We're all fans of that. And former chief technology officer at the U.S. Federal Trade Commission. And just because she's not busy enough, also distinguished career professor of computer science, technology, and policy at Carnegie Mellon University. She pioneered the field known as data privacy and the emerging area known as algorithmic fairness. And her work is explicitly cited in government regulations worldwide, including the U.S. Federal Medical Privacy Regulation, known as HIPAA. So we've all read many pages of HIPAA. Or we've tried to with 0.8 font. She is recipient of the prestigious Louis D. Brandeis Privacy Award, the American Psychiatric Association's Privacy Advocacy Award, and has testified before government bodies worldwide. She earned her PhD in computer science from MIT in 2001, the first Black woman to do so. If you haven't learned enough about her and you want to learn more, you can check her out at latanyasweeney.org. It's Latanya Sweeney, all one word. While the presentation is going on, we want to address concerns you all have. So please, throughout the presentation, please enter your questions into the chat. Now over to you, Professor Sweeney.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for allowing me. That was quite a list of talks that you guys have. Those are amazing talks, especially given your focus of attention. I'm really here to support you. So as I'm speaking, if there's something that you want to talk about or you want further questions about, we can certainly navigate the discussion wherever you want. I will also leave extra time for Q&A as well. So the talk I have for you is is sort of looking at an arc. I mean, we live in an amazing time. Many historians call this the fourth industrial revolution, or I should say the third industrial revolution. There's a controversy as to whether we actually are living through two back to back or whether it's one. But if you just think about the second industrial revolution, it brought us cars, electricity, and everything we know. in terms of Kleenex and so forth, all the things that we take for basic facts of life. And the third industrial revolution, which has a start date in the 1950s with the invention of the semiconductor, has brought us mainframe computers and then personal computers, the Internet of Things, mobile phones, and more recently, AI as sort of a revolution within a revolution. One thing is for sure, we don't know when it's going to end, but it has already transformed every aspect of our lives, how we work, how we play, how we communicate. And so it's also changing our notion of governance and our notion of our own civic future. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. This is what a camera looked like at the time American jurisprudence was trying to figure out what were going to be the rules for taking people's photograph in public. And after decades of wrangling through the court system and so forth, it was decided that you can photograph people in public without their permission. And this is what a telephone looked like at the time American jurisprudence is trying to figure out what were going to be the rules for recording a conversation. And again, decades of wrangling through the court systems, and it was decided that you need consent to record people's conversation, depending on which state you live in, whether you need just one person who's a party to the conversation's consent, or whether you need all parties' consent. And then in 1983, this guy came to market. Now, my students have no idea what that is. I think some of you may recognize that as the Sony camcorder, the beta movie. It was the first device sold in the consumer marketplace that recorded both video and sound in a device for individuals to use. And it was just a hot ticket. Like they could not keep them on the shelf. They sold out all throughout the United States. It was just an incredible success. It's a big contraption for those of us who actually had one of these things. It was a big contraption to set on your shoulder. You had to balance it with your other hand. You had to deal with the focus. And if you didn't keep it all balanced and get it all right, you would basically throw away what was really thousands of dollars of an investment. Minoru Morio was the vice president at Sony at the time, and he was responsible for the beta movie and the Sony camcorder series. And right in the middle of this success with the beta movie, he calls in his chief designer, Yuji Morimiya, and he says, the thing is just too big. I need something that'll fit in the palm of my hand. And I want you to design it, and I want it in 18 months. And this was like crazy talk because you can't just like take a piece of electrical component and just shrink it and think it's going to work. They didn't even have microphones that would work small enough. And if you did try to just shrink everything down, it would just be too hot to hold from the current. But they decided they would give it a try, and Sony threw tons of resources at this. And the 18-month deadline came and went, and it wasn't there. But a few months later, this came to market, the Sony Handycam. And in fact, it looks very similar to how it looks now. Their first advertising campaign was, in fact, a woman holding it in the palm of her hands. And this thing went off like hotcakes. In fact, if this were a business talk, this is kind of this reign of money is pretty much where our talk would end. That is, it's a business success story. There's a technology problem. They work hard with a vision. They break all the rules in trying to find a solution. They do break through, they get it to work, and they rejoice. But in the work that I do, this is actually just the beginning. This is when a technology comes to market and is incredibly successful. The question is, how does it fit into society? What kind of harms might it have? In the case of the Sony camcorder, it came to market with no mute button. That meant that it was impossible to take photographs without sound on the camcorder. But as I just told you, that's against the law here in the United States. It's okay if you go around photographing people in public, but you can't just automatically be recording their conversations. And so, as you would expect, people started going to jail. one of the early stories was a woman who fixed one of those camcorders to her child and had him on a school bus, and the camera recorded various atrocities happening from the school bus driver and some teachers. She takes the video recording down to down to the local police department, and they arrest her for illegal wiretapping. There was another case here in the Boston area. There was a protest happening at Boston University, and a person, a bystander on the sidewalk, has one of these camcorders, and he's recording a protester being arrested. The police stop arresting him, they turn around, and they arrest the bystander who had the video camera. And he faced 7 years in prison. Now we fast forward. The state of Pennsylvania has a law that now requires video recording with sound on all the school buses in Pennsylvania. And the American Civil Liberties Union took the case of the Boston, that happened in Boston, as well as a few other ones of those, and won us all the right to record the police in the public service of their duty. And one of the interesting things that happened at the time was because there was such a success, it wasn't just the Sony camcorder had no mute button. Everybody in their rush to duplicate what Sony had done, you couldn't buy one on the market that didn't have that had a mute button. All of them were void of it. Today, most of us take video with our phones, with smartphones, and in this constant replication of what was successful, they don't have a mute button either. And so more harms are likely to come as we go forward. And now to fix this problem would just simply be a matter of a software update. So for a fraction of a penny, Sony forced the United States to kind of change its laws. We might have changed our laws anyway, but changing it because we were forced to because of the design of the technology is not really how we're supposed to be changing our laws. But this example can be replicated, is replicated over and over again. It's the issue, the true issue is that technology designers are the new policy makers. The design of the technologies they make in the products we use dictate how we live our lives. Let me give you another example. A few years later, Sony continued to evolve its the Handycam, and they focused on night vision. And so they introduced a new version of it called with Night Shot. And the thing about Night Shot is it used infrared. And the idea was that their advertisements were you could take photos crystal clear even in the darkness of night on a subway platform or something like that. The problem was that if I used the same camera and I took photographs of people out in public, it rendered them nude. It took away their clothes. And so in a very short amount of time, there were all these images being flooded on the internet, primarily of women who were out in public fully dressed, but the images online would show tattoos that were underneath their clothes as well as their various body parts. It was pretty, it had quite an uproar at the time. And in that particular case, Sony ended up doing a recall, and it cost them millions of dollars. Their stock prices plummeted, and so forth. Again, arbitrary design decision having huge impacts on how we live our lives. One of the problems with technology, though, is it doesn't seem to learn from its mistakes. So one, it will replicate a mistake if it's part of a successful product. And two, there's no learning curve. We don't teach them, hey, that thing happened with Night Shot. So in 2020, when Photochrome did it again, it kind of boggles your mind. All these years later, a Chinese company came out with a smartphone in the US market that was also advertising low light images, and it too would remove your clothes. Now, the biggest difference here, one of the reasons that we didn't hear as much about it, is now all they had to do was a software update to change it. But still, the fact is it shouldn't have happened in the first place. And so I put to you that in many ways, we're fastly losing our democracy, perhaps on many axes. But one of the ways that we're losing our democracy is in favor of what I would term a technocracy. It's a term that always has always had a meaning, but I'm giving it a new meaning, a meaning that is the government or control of a society or a people or an industry through the design of technology. And one of the things that I'll point out or try to eh, provide to you is evidence that we live in a technocracy now. Many years ago, I'm a computer scientist by nature, as you heard, by training, by desire, by passion. And when I was a graduate student at MIT, you could see the future coming. And you knew that this revolution that was coming for technology was going to change everything. And like many people at that time, we were very naive. We thought this was going to be the great equalizer. It was going to right all the wrongs of society. After all, technology was cheap, it was be easily accessible, it had no bias, and so forth. And one day I ran into an ethicist. I was going to get coffee and walking past the lounge, and I heard this ethicist say computers are evil. And when I stopped to correct her thinking, I mean, didn't she know about the beautiful tomorrow that's going to lie ahead? The year is 1996. And she literally foretold the future. She talked about the idea that the technology is coming so fast. It's changing all of our social contracts. No one's keeping an eye on it, and it's going horribly wrong. And I talked about all the benefits of that the new technologies would bring. But eventually our pie in the sky conversation needed a concrete example because we were passionately engaged in this conversation for quite some time. And so she said, oh, well, she gave me this example, and the example she gave me was of health data, publicly available health data that was being provided. She said, look, it was on state employees, families, and their retirees here in Massachusetts. And a copy had already been given to researchers and another copy sold to industry. And I said, that's fantastic. Now with computers, and of course, what we're talking about are small personal computers that were on a desktop. I said, with computers, look how many more people can find discoveries in that data, ways to save money, hypothesis formation, and so forth. And she said, yeah, as long as it's anonymous. And so I did a sort of back of the envelope calculation. So that if you look at the circle on the left, you'll see it had various medical information. It did not have name, it didn't have address, it didn't have social security number, but it did have date of birth, that would be month, day, and year of birth, gender, and a 5-digit zip code. And I sort of did this quick calculation. There are 365 days in a year. Let's say people live 100 years, and there are two genders in the database. If you multiply that out, it's 73,000 possible combinations. But the typical zip code in Massachusetts only had about 25,000 people. So that meant that that combination of date of birth, gender, and zip code would be unique for most people. So my argument is quickly falling apart as I'm convincing myself that, wait, this data is not anonymous. There's a problem. So I run up to the city of Cambridge and I purchased the Cambridge voter list. It cost me $20 and it came on two 5 1/4 inch floppy disk. And my students have no idea what a 5 1/4 inch floppy disk is. Some of them say, I thought they were small and hard. It just reminds us of how time is moving so quickly. But the list also shared those same demographics. It had name and some voting information. And the idea was to link on these demographics to see if I could put name to the health data that was there. William Weld was the governor of Massachusetts at that time, and he had collapsed. So information about his collapse was in that health data. He lived in Cambridge. And in fact, only 6 people had his date of birth. 3 of them were men, and he was the only one in his 5-digit zip code. Date of birth, gender, and zip code were unique for William Weld in the voter data, which made it unique in the health data, and I could identify his record uniquely in that health data. I then did an experiment like, well, that's fine for Cambridge, but how does that translate to the rest of the United States? And was able to compute that estimate that 87% of the population of the United States was unique based on date of birth. That would be month, day, and year of birth, gender, and 5-digit zip code. And of course, as you aggregate from date of birth to year of birth, and from geography from 5-digit zip code to county, the identifiability of the information comes way down. It doesn't get to zero, though. There are some people where all you know is that they live in Yellowstone and their year of birth, and that's pretty much all you need to re-identify them. They tend to be rangers, if in all fairness. But this founding was quite shocking. It was happening at exactly the time the United States was debating in Congress what was to become known as the HIPAA privacy rule. And in the preamble of HIPAA, they cite this example that they could no longer do business as usual, if you will, with respect to anonymizing health data, and in fact, anonymizing data generally. And so over the 2 years that followed, laws around the world changed, almost all of them citing the Weld experiment, which is what that's called. And it also sort of launched this field known as data privacy. As we were to move on through the 90s, one of the things that was interesting about the 90s is that every time government had a problem to solve, I won't go into the details of those, the answer was to start a new data collection. So this issue of privacy was expanding in two different ways at the same time. It was expanding because our policies and practices didn't really protect us or help us understand the vulnerability that we were going into. And at the same time, we were adding more and more data collections. Many years later, we wanted to know, like, where, so as an example, where all the places a typical patient's data might go. And so if you go to the datamap.org, you can click on any of the nodes and we'll provide you with the evidence that we have of what company was sharing or hospital was sharing what information. And it's pretty shocking. This particular diagram has been replicated in books, in many books, and huge number of government, over 1,000 government reports around the world, showing all the places that health data could go. One of the things that's interesting about all those flows is that only half of them are even covered by a law. That means that the other half aren't covered by any law at all. It's a reminder to us that here in the United States, we don't really have, and we probably will never have, comprehensive privacy. And what that means is the following. I often tell my students it's like why it is that Zuckerberg could start Facebook in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but not in Cambridge, England. If privacy is the idea of privacy is to drape, say, a naked body, our laws, our privacy laws, our 2,187 privacy laws all line up like little dots on top of each other, leaving most of the body exposed. And if it's not covered by a law, it's perfectly fair game. But in Europe, it's radically different. In Europe, these comprehensive privacy laws drape the entire body. And and the that has a direct impact though on innovation as well. So, for example, if Mark Zuckerberg had been in Cambridge, England, he was collecting personal information on individuals. He was holding them in terms of these profiles. He would have to get permission to do that. In order to get permission, he'd have to file a design paper and so forth with the privacy commissioner, and he'd have to wait for a determination. But he was a student, and so here in the United States, he could just do it at will, and that's what he did, and then it takes off. So these are the kinds of forces that are, and you can see them replicating themselves over and over again, that's sort of generating this power of technology design. And all these years later, so that was 1996 was the Weld experiment, and we still don't have a handle on data privacy. It remains still up for grabs. I've had a bit of an uncanny history. I was to this idea of doing a simple experiment like the Weld experiment and getting thousands of great minds to follow was to happen to me again. And it happened when I became a faculty member at here at Harvard. I was giving an interview to a reporter, and I was actually, ironically, typing my name into the Google search bar, looking for actually one of the papers on with respect to the Weld experiment. But instead, what came up were these ads implying I had an arrest record. And the reporter says, "Well, why do you have an arrest? Why tell me about that arrest record? Forget that weld experiment. I want to know about this arrest record." And I said, "Well, I've never been arrested." And he says, "Well, did you do something to Google? Why are they running ads saying that you have been arrested?" And we go on, and he's a Adam Tanner. He's a very aggressive reporter. He was saying, "Well, did Harvard know you were arrested at the time they hired you? Did you plead guilty or innocent?" He goes on and on. So eventually I click the link. I pay Instant Checkmate $89 and show that they actually have data on seemingly every adult in the United States. And they have a Latanya Sweeney, and there is no arrest record. But the question began, why did we get this ad? We knew that the ads were coming up only when you had to give a first name and last name. It had to be the combination together, and it had to be a real person. And we would constantly see that there were lots of names for which the word arrest was showing up. And then there were these other names for which these very neutral, like find more information, was coming up. And the question was, what made one set of groups come up with arrest ads, given that it's a name on the full name of the person, and some were neutral. And so Adam Tanner is an Italian American, and he says to me, he says, "Oh, it's because you got one of those black sounding first names." And so I look at him and I said, "What do you mean by a black sounding first name?" But then I type in Latanya in the Google search bar, and I get all these black faces staring back at me. I type in Tanya in the Google search bar and I get all these white faces staring back at me. And clearly there are some names given more often to black babies than white babies. And for and this algorithm was delivering these arrest ads more often if your name was given to a black baby than a white baby. And it didn't matter the company running the ads, even their own database saying, "Yes, I'm running this arrest ad on a Latanya Farrell for which there is no criminal record. I will never run an arrest ad on Kristen Lynch for which this Kristen Lynch, for example, does have an arrest record." And so with that, I was then to spend a couple of months of my life, my starting out at Harvard. I ran hundreds of thousands of lookups and VPN networks around the country to figure out what was going on with these ads. And what I learned was that if your name was given more often to a black baby than a white baby, you would get an ad implying you had an arrest record, even if you didn't, 80% of the time. So discrimination in the United States is not illegal. Many of us are looking forward, or actually some of us, like myself, are enjoying our senior citizen discounts. My students absolutely love their student discounts. So discrimination is not illegal. But what is illegal are certain groups in certain circumstances. One of those groups is blacks, and one of those circumstances is employment. So if Ebony and Jill are both in competition for the same job, and the potential employer types their name into the Google search bar, and up pops an ad implying Ebony has an arrest record, even if she doesn't, and up pops an ad implying Jill doesn't. It's an adverse impact, and the difference they call it the 4/5 rule. The Department of Justice won't start a case if it's just a little difference, a little bit of a disadvantage. But if it's a disproportionate difference, like 80% of the time, it's adversely impacting the protected group, which is what I found. And so this result was the first case for which met the criteria for the Department of Justice to do an investigation under the Civil Rights Act. And it sort of launched this area called algorithmic fairness, this notion of predictive algorithms and their various biases. Um, I'm going to kind of just skip a little bit ahead in terms of if people want to know how this came to be and how it works, I'd be happy to tell you later. Let me just go on to say that since then, it's not clear that the Department of Justice is doing this on a regular basis. And so we have a law, this U.S. Civil Rights Act. It's just not clear that it's enforced online. So after the discrimination in online ads, we realized that predictive algorithms are showing up everywhere. It was the kind of the AI revolution before the it was the earliest version of the AI revolution were these decision-making algorithms. And so Alvaro Bedoya was a professor at Georgetown at the time, and he and I realized that The world was not ready for these predictive algorithms. And in particular, the people who were going to be the most impacted were actually groups for which we already had civil society groups fighting for their cause, but they weren't prepared to fight it online. They wouldn't understand these algorithms and wouldn't know. So he and I had a bit of a tag team talk that we used to do. We went around to various civil society organizations and would explain to them what was coming with these predictive algorithms. This is an example. At the time we were doing this, there was no company that did this. Now there are tons of them, including LinkedIn. But the idea is that you have a huge collection of resumes and you offer a new service to potential employers. Your new service says, give me a job that you want filled, and we'll use a predictive algorithm to make recommendations to you about who you should hire. Then you'll give some feedback to the algorithm saying who to hire and who not to hire. So you might say, I want these guys to come in for an interview. I'm definitely not interested in these. Predictive algorithms have the characteristic that they learn over time. They're going to learn your preferences. And so after a while, when you invite somebody in, that's what you're going to get. You're only going to get the kind of people that you wanted to see. So we can think about these kinds of predictive algorithm issues as the bias problems that we're seeing could be in the technology, but usually the technology is just a piece of mathematics that's doing statistical correlations at scale. The bias could be in the setup or training data, which was the case in the ads. There was the discrepancy in the kind of ads the company itself was placing. Here, though, the resumes themselves aren't where the bias is coming from. Instead, it's this feedback. It's the idea that the employer instead is saying, I have a preference for a particular group, and they're providing the adverse impact. One of the things that makes the difference between this case and the online ad case is I could sit here and run hundreds of thousands of web searches and see and document the ads that were there and be able to show that bias. But in this particular example of hiring, I can't because I'm not a party to it. The public's not a party to it. It's just between LinkedIn and the employer, and it's just keeping the employer's preference. Now, we have a law against this kind of thing. It's called the Equal Employment Act around age discrimination, race discrimination, gender discrimination. But we have no way of enforcing it in all the companies now who use exactly that approach. So as far as online services are concerned, equal employment is just up for grabs. It's not enforced. It's not really there. I want to give you another example, and then I'll try to not be so negative and try to give us a little hope. Um, so recidivism algorithms. This is work by Julia Angwin when she was at ProPublica. Recidivism algorithms, in fact, these decision-making algorithms are used throughout the criminal justice system. In this case, the recidivism algorithm that she brought to light was used in Broward County, Florida. It's being used particularly to identify whether or not the risk of a person repeating a crime and using that to determine bail. So somebody gets arrested, they're not necessarily guilty of that crime, they have their day in court. But whether or not they have to stay in jail until that day comes, or whether or not they can go out if they pay a bail, is a decision, a recidivism decision that a judge makes. So in Broward County, they began using this algorithm to help make a suggestion. So the Brescia Borden that you see here, at the time that photo is taken, she's 16 years old. She doesn't look 16 to me, but she's 16 years old at the time the photo is taken. She and another young woman were walking down the street and they saw this little kid on a bicycle. He rides his bicycle into his yard. He runs inside to get lunch. They decide they're going to steal his bicycle. So they go and they're taking his bicycle away when a neighbor spots him and comes out and starts yelling at them. They drop the bicycle and they start to run. Another neighbor had already called the police. The two girls separate, but Brescia runs right into the police car as it's approaching. So she gets arrested for attempting to steal this bicycle. Vernon, on the other hand, is goes into a convenience store that's associated with a gas station. He has a gun and he holds up the gas station and he gets arrested for armed robbery. So now the two of them need to have their day in court. They're brought up for a bail decision, and the algorithm is going to make a recommendation on a scale from 1 to 10. A 10 means this person is so violent and unacceptable to society. Please do not let them out because the likelihood that some more harm will come is too high. A 1 means please just forgive them for the sorry they were even arrested. Perhaps you just open the door for them on the way out and no bail is needed. You're almost apologizing that they have to have a day in court in a way. And so you can see that Brescia got an 8 and Vernon got a 3. And the disparity of those numbers are absolutely huge. You just don't expect someone who's trying to steal a bicycle to get an 8 and someone who walked into a convenience store who has a history of armed robberies and attempted armed robbery. You don't expect them to basically go out with a slap on the wrist. But yet that's what these algorithms were doing. In the model that I showed you before, it becomes really clear what's actually happening here. In some ways, the algorithm is more of a statistical study of the decisions the judges had been making in Broward County for years. That is, the data that was used to train the model for which it was making its decisions was prior decisions that had been made. And all the algorithm was doing is maintaining the same kind of disparity. But what made it different was here's a judge, and what you see as a judge is this mathematical, here's a number, here's some graphs and figures, and it seems very neutral and not hides sort of the realities of the situation. Like I said, these kinds of algorithms are used throughout criminal justice system. It means that the criminal justice system, this idea that you're innocent until proven guilty, this idea of everyone has a fair chance, is still up for grabs. These algorithms are usually sealed, hidden behind intellectual property. The data on which they're trained are often not available. And so as a result, there's kind of like no accountability either. I said I was going to give you only one more, but this will be the last one of these I'll give you. This is Joy Bowani. This is when she was a graduate student at MIT, and she comes to me one day and she says she shows me these two photos. It's actually a video, and she shows me this video. And what's happening on the left side is she's looking at the camera at her laptop, and she's running a face detection algorithm, except the camera doesn't see her face. In fact, it doesn't see her face until she takes a white mask and puts that in front of her face. And then you can see the active appearance model triangulating to figure out where the eyes, nose, and mouth may be. And she went on to do an experiment where she took people, legislative members around the world, and she put them through the face recognition systems, but all of the big ones, all of the major face recognition systems of the time. And what she found was that these systems do really well on white guys and really bad on black women. And as your skin gets darker, it gets worse. And as you go from male to female, it gets worse. And again, and it had a profound impact on society in part because IBM as one of the manufacturers decided to it would never produce this technology and hasn't since. And then several other companies put a pause on it as they try to figure out what to do about it. So this is no different than the other examples. The bias here also came in the training data, as I was able to tell Joy I'm old enough to know exactly how this problem came to be. The Department of Defense uh, often will set a vision for a new technology, let's say 20 years in the future, like driverless cars was one. There have been many. That's how we got the internet even. And they'll set this goal for something in the future, and then they'll try to find a way to help scientists and engineers get there by seeding some money and usually having a grand challenge contest. Face recognition was exactly like that as well. They offered a grand challenge. NIST was responsible for providing the images. all they could start with in the beginning was very rudimentary techniques. And so as a result, they just need, can they just do the easiest simple thing? And they define the easiest simple thing as straight on shots of white male faces. Can you, with no hair, no glasses, just can you do it on this? And then if you did well, then you got more money, you got better students. And then the next year, the competition would be a little harder. And so eventually they added facial hair, eventually they added glasses, eventually they added other features as well, like side pose, not always just the frontal pose, and so forth. And so what is happening over time is the face recognition algorithms are getting better, but they're not being trained on a diversity of images. And so as a result, we end up with this adverse impact. I could go on, and I won't. There are tons of laws and even constitutional amendments that we can't protect online. No one, the regulators and those who normally keep guard aren't able to do it in an online way. They don't know how, they don't have the tools. When I was at the Federal Trade Commission, if the public had any idea of the people and the way the FTC works. They're fearless. They're amazing advocates for the consumer, and they will go after anyone, anytime, including IRS. I mean, they just don't hold back on anyone. The only problem is they only know how to do that in brick and mortar buildings. They have no way of knowing how you do that online. And so a lot of my time there was helping them to take their craft and move that craft online. But for the most part, all of these things are up for grabs, you know, because no one has done that translation. All right, but I'm here to talk to you about the election space. And so in 2016, I took a group of students. So I'd had this kind of uncanniness of doing an experiment early, having 1,000 great minds to follow. Happened twice, the Weld experiment, and then again with the discrimination in online ads. In 2016, I decided I was going to take a group of students and I was going to say, what could go wrong with technology and the election? And it was the most amazing journey ever. We found lots of things. We found polling place information. It was all over the place. We set up a Vote GPS website to give authentic information. Google ended up taking that in, had a parallel project. They said, we've got this. Once we got close to the election, they had it under control about making sure everyone found the right polling place because they had these cards that would pop up that would tell you exactly the polling location and voting information. Of course, they haven't done it since, but they did do it in response to our Vote GPS project. Around March, though, we found these bots. So a lot of people had found bots on Twitter in 2016 early on, but those were bots that were just spewing information constantly. Every second, so many messages a second. So you knew there were bots because no human could possibly send text messages at that volume. But what we became really interested in were what we called persona bots. These were bots that looked like people and acted like people. The only thing is they weren't people. And they would but their followers were. So one of the things I had learned at the Federal Trade Commission is how trust works, and especially trust online. And it works by the smaller the community, the more intersections you have with a small group of people online, the more you will trust them. And that's where the biggest, largest, most amazing, egregious frauds happen, is in those smaller, intimate circles of trust online. And in what these persona bots were doing, where they were building those at scale, meaning there were thousands of these bots. They acted like a human, their followers were human, and the only thing they would tweet most of the time was just plus wanting something that some follower had said. And then every once in a while, it would just deliver this incredible payload of misinformation, making it incredibly believable, high professional grade. Later, we found out that we were told when we gave these informations over to Twitter and to national security that we learned that they were primarily state actors. They were bots that were put in place by state actors. Twitter did actually take down thousands of them, but there are still thousands of them there doing their thing, even as we speak today. So then, as we came towards July, a real question came up. An interesting story came out of California, and it was the primary in California. It was a closed primary, and what had happened was, the Republicans showed up to vote in the primary, but many of them in the county were turned away because their affiliation in the data gave them Green County, I mean a Green Party, Democrat, anything but Republican. And so they couldn't actually vote, even though they had voted for, in many cases, some cases, decades as a Republican. So they contact this guy who's the attorney general in Riverside, the district attorney in Riverside County at the time. So he's getting hundreds of calls. So he takes police officers and he goes to the various polling places to see what the heck is going on. And what they learn is that someone had gone online, impersonated these voters, and changed their party affiliation. And by changing that party affiliation, they had disenfranchised them from voting in the primary. We became alarmed. Was that a trial run for something larger? What would it take to do that same kind of thing, but not change the party, just change your address? By changing your address and not changing everyone like they did, where people would pick up a phone, but just change a small number distributed across the state. If you were to disenfranchise them because they showed up at the wrong polling place, because you changed their address to some place that they weren't expecting, and so therefore they wouldn't know what polling place to go to. You could shave off 3 to 5% of the election results with any notice. And we found out that we've calculated and showed that you could do this in 35 states back in 2016 for about 9,000 or $10,000. And so we were quite alarmed by the result. Congress did have a hearing on it and so forth. But for the most part, the vulnerability stays there. And so we became really alarmed in two ways. One, we had brought this forward, and two, that no one was really kind of keeping an eye out on that problem. And so we came up with a solution that we felt was pretty powerful, vote flare. And my colleague here, Josh Visnaw, has been running our vote flare project. Josh, I don't know if you want to say a few words about what vote flare is and how it works, and then I can show a couple of results, and then you could finish off with the League of Women Voters in Ohio.
Absolutely, and I'll be very brief. We like to call vote flare is kind of like credit card alerts for your voter record. So if you're enrolled with vote flare, you get an alert direct to your phone via text message anytime a change to your voter registration happens. So that could be something important like getting moved from active to inactive. It could be that change of address. It could be that party affiliation, whatever change that an election official makes to your voter registration, you get that alert from us, notifying you of that alert, and then redirects you where you can cure that in advance of an election. So you can vote where you want to vote, and any important change gets communicated direct to voter because we know that increasingly more election officials don't have the capabilities to do voter direct communications, right? They're sending mailers with these important actions that need to be taken, but very few people are responding to those mailers. So with Vote Flare, we provide that reassurance, giving you that alert to your voter record change, allowing you to change it before it's too late.
Right, and we've done lots of studies, though we're still analyzing because we just had no time to really take a full moment to think about it. One of the things we did during this election season is we did surveys. We offered the service, of course, and we also responded to people who we provided service even to people who didn't necessarily come to our website to sign up. But I just want to share a couple of statistics, and once the final results are all in, we'll certainly be happy to share them with you. But in the surveys in the middle of this election season, 75% of the respondents considered vote flare to be valuable, and a third of them considered it extremely valuable. And then so that's for people who sign up or people who the concept, and then we also had people who signed up. But we also had this idea of what about people who are just being removed from a list? They didn't sign up for VoteFlare, but we have this great infrastructure. We could find their best phone number for them. We could send a text message to them. So one of the places we tried this out was in Ohio. The final results are still coming in, but Josh, maybe you could say a little bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks to the executive director of League of Women Voters in Ohio, Jen Miller, and a variety of folks in the voting rights community in Ohio kind of tipped us off to the voter purge that happened in July. And so these were about 160,000 voters that were set for removal. The state of Ohio made this list available. What we did is said, okay, we have about 3 or 4 weeks before these voters are going to get removed. There's not a lot of options to try to get those 160,000 voters to take that action, right? Now, making a list public is one thing, but actually communicating that and giving time for voters to make that change is another. So we stepped in and were able to match the best phone number for all 158,000 voters. And we went ahead and sent a preventative text message out notifying them that they were about to get removed from a voter roll in Ohio based on state records. And then if they were still an Ohio resident and needed to change that, they were able to redirect to their state secretary's website that gave them the information to remedy that. So we saw a huge engagement rate. And I mentioned this before. Typically what a state would do or a county would do, they're just going to send you a mailer, right? And that mailer going to either have a return postage or not to notify that voter of that alert that needs to be taken. And we saw 10 to 11% of text messages that we sent out, voters actually clicked on this redirect link that went back to their Secretary of State's website. And taking that type of information to a state or a county in terms of 10 to 11% engagement was huge because they know that they're spending a lot of money on mailers and not a lot of people are actually reading these. So we saw this as super encouraging in terms of trying to change in terms of how to get critical information to voters, that voter direct communications piece. So we saw some encouraging results from the Ohio work that we did.
Thank you, Josh. I want to just I don't want to leave on a negative note, but I also just want to leave lots of time for questions and answers. So I just want to say that armed with these kinds of experiments, we've been able to teach students how to do this, and the work that the students have been doing have given us new laws, modified regulations, and changed business practices at a lot of the big tech companies. And so we have a whole series of tools that we teach them about how to create change, how to spot these, how to spot these issues and craft experiments that can have these impact. You can read about a lot of them in the Tech Science Journal. Let me just stop there because we already took longer than I wanted. I wanted to make sure we got some Q&A in. So let me stop and see if there are some questions.
Hi, here. This is Sherry back again, and we have several questions in the chat as well as some that have been sent to us earlier. So the first one in the chat is, isn't technology not only driving legislation or concepts of privacy, but also the idea of what is factual? With the rapid acceleration of AI deployment to the public, and technocrats seem to accept that a certain level of hallucination is acceptable, leaving it to the user to be able to identify AI fabrications as untrue. Isn't the willingness to deploy unreliable AI tools with the excuse that the platforms are still learning means the alternative facts are becoming a reality and the idea of truth or fact-based information is being devalued?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it's even worse than that. I'll tell you why I say everything that was just said is true. And I think you guys know that because you just had a talk recently about it. But right now, 2 years ago or 4 years ago, if I went to the internet, the content that's on the internet, factual or not, was human generated. in 2 to 4 years from now, almost all the content on the internet will be machine generated, because people will just use AI to spout and produce new articles, produce product reports, produce everything that you think of that humans are providing will just be generated. And what that'll do is keep us in an echo chamber, because the same kind of biases that I was talking about in the earlier versions of AI, the predictive algorithms, is also true of like things like ChatGPT. They have the same kind of biases, the same kind of things that they won't talk about or do talk about. So, and the kind of experiments that we ran, we took a series of medical issues and we asked early versions of ChatGPT, what do you do if you have this or that? And sometimes it would say you drink bleach. And it would say you drink bleach because that was a common conversation happening around the use of bleach in a medical situation. So, and it has no way of knowing whether that was a good idea or a bad idea. And so it just simply provides it. So yes, I would say that that's absolutely true. We're in for whatever notions we've been having and difficulties we've been having about what makes a fact. It's now going on steroids.
Well, just to interject one that isn't on the chat, but it got sent to us earlier. What recommendations, it's kind of based on your last comments, what recommendations could we make to corral technology and make it a more positive player in campaigns and elections? Or is there a way to corral it?
Yeah, I mean, so I have two answers to that question. One answer is, so when we launched VoteFlare, we were warned by people who had produced what's called Civic tech. And they gave this long list of all the civic tech that had come before us, meaning technology that we as a society believes is in the better interest of our society, of our civic entities to have. And none of it, even if you don't like VoteFlare, I'm sure you'll like some of the other ones. The problem is none of them have ever been sustained. The only ones that ever get sustained is if they're willing to go partisan. So if any one of them is willing to sell yourself to one side, then you can make a lot of money, you can have sustainability, but an inability to sustain it in the middle, if you will. And so I think this is very challenging. This is a very challenging question about how do we even think about technology in the election space, given that it's kind of weaponized in many ways. It's become a part of the weaponry of elections. Which I might just say is why the league is very important, frankly. More important now today than ever before. And as we're going forward, more important. And the fact that you're having these talks, that's huge and incredibly promising. I mean, somebody has to keep an eye out and keep asking these questions.
Yeah, one of the questions we almost always ask is what can we as the league and us as individuals do? And I think you are answering this in just about every question that we've had so far. So, we're not giving up.
Good.
Another question here. Of course, we're all dying to know how the technocracy has played out in the 2024 election, the micro-targeting, the false flag messaging, and the end of legacy media. Your thoughts on that?
Well, so one thing you'll learn about me, or you may know, I never speak out of turn. I let the scientific facts speak for me. So we've gathered a tremendous amount of data. We're analyzing it. Josh will tell you, I've tried really hard to get some of the analysis done in time for this talk so that we could share some of it with you. And I didn't get that, we didn't get that far. But as soon as it's available, we'll let you know what we have, what we were able to document, what we were able to find. And we had projects looking at, the messaging provided, to individuals through various mechanisms. What were their experiences like online, as well as changes in voter records over time.
We will be waiting to hear once you have the time. And actually, I think it's great that you want to wait until you actually feel confident in what you're saying instead of just trying to give us an answer that we want to hear maybe or don't want to hear. Here's one that's a little bit different. What are your thoughts regarding the revitalization of nuclear power plants to provide electricity to the tech industry for cryptocurrency and AI servers?
And not just AI servers, cloud computing, period. I mean, I think this is so talking about clashes colliding. Now our clashes are so big that the clashes are having clashes. So this is sort of the technology issues that we talk about now clashing with climate issues as well. And just environmental issues with respect to nuclear power. And it brings up the question of, who's going to be able to afford electrical power? Let's just start right there for a minute. How do we compete against, ChatGPT needs lots of power to spin up a Lambda function, a virtual machine on every chat it's having in any given moment is a separate spun up machine. How do we compete? How does that can work for the local family who's also having to pay for the same electricity? And will you be able to compete financially against the demands of big companies? So I think we're going to feel it in our pocketbook in a really strong way. So that is a place that maybe legislation can help, but at the same time, it's going to push these barriers around things like nuclear power and other opportunities for electricity.
Yeah, wow. Another one. What are your thoughts about the FTC under the Musk administration?
Yeah, how that works.
The next comment was eek.
So I mean, so the FTC has never, the FTC has never been the strongest gatekeeper of our tech companies. In a realization that it's there's two parts to it. On the one hand, we're like the FTC is like the police department of the internet, but on the other, because these are American companies primarily. But on the other hand, it's also an economic boom for us too. And so there's sort of an odd sort of relationship. Tech companies are also the largest contributors to political campaigns. So it's kind of it's a bit baked in already. The only way it can go any further in favor of the companies is to literally, it's hard to imagine how you go much more in favor of the companies. Because for the most part, the FTC, as I just talked about in my entire talk, is we're already not able to hold you accountable for most laws online. And what else, so now you're just talking about even the appearance of trying to hold you accountable could be brought into question. So I think it could be quite challenging. I don't know that Elon Musk will be in charge. I'm sure he's got bigger sights than the FTC itself, but I think the gist of the question is right, meaning that there goes the Clean Air Act. If you were talking to environmentalists, that's been something on the chopping block politically for a long time. So I think we'll see the same kind of thing happening with monopoly. The kind of things that the FTC does is monopolies as well as deceitful practices and things like that.
Here's one. Do you have any concerns that your group or some of your labs might be shut down, as happened with Stanford Information Observatory?
No.
Okay, good.
The reason I say that is, I don't have a political agenda other than, I don't mind America's laws changing. And let me say it differently. I started this talk by telling you what I was like when I was that I started this route because as a graduate student, I believed in a technology that would give us a better tomorrow. To be honest with you, I don't think I've ever stopped being that graduate student. I think it's this idea of believing that we should be able to have the benefits of these new technologies without these harms. And I think that's the only it's not that I'm saying that the technology companies are bad per se. All I'm saying is we can do better than this, and we can teach students that you hire to do better than this.
Right. We're going a little over. We have one or two more questions. Are you
I'm good.
okay with
I'm
that,
good.
or do you need to
Yeah.
go?
No, I'm
You're
good.
okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
If you can stay, I can stay.
Well, I think you and Josh are both very busy people, especially now, and maybe you need some time off once in a while. So we have a couple here that are kind of related. One participant writes, AI and media literacy need to be required in schools. And then further on down, I used to teach media literacy, one of those courses that gets dropped when budgets get cut. So I'm thinking, what are your thoughts on, say, K-12 media literacy as opposed to what students will likely be able to get at a university?
Yeah, I think this is fantastic. I have a teenage son, and it's been really interesting to see both his school try to help him navigate information online and how do you determine what's valuable, and these sort of rules of thumbs that they've been giving them. And the question, things like check the URL. Is that a reputable URL? How do you know if that's reputable? Well, you'll go do this and that and so forth. So they kind of gotten drilled into them. I think it's incredibly important that we keep doing it. The problem is it's a curriculum that has to keep evolving, because the idea of using a search bar and seeing search results where I can know where the results are coming from is probably not going to be there in 2 years. It's probably going to be a text box. You type it in, and it's just going to be a conversation with what it says it found online.
Yeah.
And so how do you interpret that?
I mean, do you think your son feels confident that he will be able to make some of these determinations, or?
He's 16 years old. He believes he can do everything.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Even things that really, really probably might not be able to, he shouldn't be considering. Let's see here. There's one person who's commented on this book. I hope I pronounce her name correctly. Dr. Joy Buolamwini's book, Unmasking AI. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Joy Buolamwini, that was the Black woman that I showed you when she was a graduate student. Her book is about, right, exactly. Her book is about that journey that she took. The thing that's interesting about Joy's journey is doing the experiment and then translating that experiment into the lives of all of us, of all of us in the public. Not just writing a paper that sits in an academic archive with a lot of past tense verbs, but actually, just translating it. I think that's incredibly important. But we need more of those. It has to be a constant stream, and those need to be partnered with civil society groups around the issues that are important to them.
Yeah, I think one of our goals with this series that you've helped us so much on is taking experts in technology and various aspects of it, and having talks that are at a level that all of us can understand and try to do something with and do something about. That's our goal with this series, and to just keep our membership and the public more aware of all these things that are coming so fast and so much. And it's just, I was just thinking before talking, here I am with both of these still on my nightstand to finish.
Well, I just want to give a shout out, and I hope you'll add my book next year. So
yes. Well, we will be definitely looking forward to it. But maybe we should let you all go. And thank you so much, you and Josh, for taking your time. And I also want to compliment you on your team, who's been so responsive to the League in emails and requests that we've made to make this presentation happen. It's been very nice for us. So we thank all the rest of you who are still online for joining us tonight, and of course Professor Sweeney and Josh. A recording of today's presentation will be on the League of Women Voters main website soon, and the recordings of earlier speakers are also there. So we hope that you'll watch ones that you may have missed and also share this resource widely. We always make a pitch for our tip jar. If you feel like making a small contribution, we're always happy to accept that to keep our series going. And we'll be taking a break in December, but stay tuned for our next gathering of Let's Talk About Digital Threats to Democracy planned for January. We also have the potential of Ann Applebaum speaking to us in February. So we have a good lineup coming forward. So thank you once again, Professor Sweeney and Josh, and all of you online. It's been great.